up, everyone? Welcome back to the Miss Teen Crypto Show. I hope everybody's having a lovely day today. Wow, I am feeling such good vibes. If you guys are new to the channel, hi, my name is Randi Hipper. Welcome. Make sure you like, subscribe, share this stream out with friends so everyone could join in on the Zesty Fives and the Alpha that Ben is going to drop today. So hello to everyone in the chat. It's really great to see you all. Thank you for everyone that was here with me this morning for the Daily Zest at 12 p.m. Eastern. I'm so happy. I'm in a really good mood today, and I know my guest is in a really good mood too, so I want to waste no time. Say hello to him. Welcome back, Ben Cowen. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me here. It was a pleasure to be here last time, and thanks for having me back.
Yay, I'm so happy to have you. There's so much going on right now. How do you feel about the cryptoverse as a whole?
Yeah, it's been a rough year for the cryptoverse as a whole. 2022 has not been kind to crypto. Ton of events that have unfolded this year that have kind of sent people away. But in the same manner, it's not necessarily something we haven't seen before, right? Like, we know these things are often very cyclical, and we are certainly getting into the typical season where we can at least start to hope that things turn back around. I mean, historical bottoms have occurred around this time, plus or minus a few months. So hopefully that we'll see some better days in the coming years. But yeah, certainly this year has not been great. And I imagine the contagion will still take a little while for us to fully work through before we're really going to see another bull market.
Yeah, it's been a while since I had you on the show. It was like pre-FTX. I feel like that's actually like a point in time that we have to look at now. It's like everyone looked at the Mt. Gox time and everyone compares things to the time of Mt. Gox. Now I feel like this is another thing people are going to compare to. Like, remember when FTX, during the FTX thing, this is what happened. How do you feel about the whole FTX nightmare, essentially? Like, did you expect any of this to unfold? And did you expect how many connections were associated with FTX?
I mean, I can't say that. Well, so like basically a day or two before it happened, I did expect it because, I mean, but by that point, like everyone expected it, right? Like, cause we kind of saw what was happening. We saw the tweets and that were going on Twitter, and kind of once the market sniffs out weakness, it just goes after it until it crumbles. So I wouldn't say that, like, it's not like I started off 2022 thinking that FTX was going to go under. But I did start off, back in Q1, realizing we have high inflation. We understand that the Federal Reserve, they're going to have to raise interest rates to get, to basically cool off demand. And normally when interest rates go up, especially as quickly as they have, it has a habit of exposing the zombie companies, like the companies that are not really, maybe they're not profitable, or maybe they're over levered, whatever it may be. Higher interest rates can help expose this sort of stuff. And I mean, honestly, it's a common part of the business cycle, these economic cycles, where you have all these companies that pop up when cash is cheap and it's, anyone can go get it for a relatively cheap rate. But when things start to go back up, you kind of figure out which companies are not solvent and which ones were, partaking in bad business practices. So I can't say for sure that I knew it was going to be FTX or any of them specifically, but in general, I think, these are typical bear market things that occur. We saw this happen in 2018. We saw it happen back in 2013 as well. I mean, these things happen, and big exchanges go down every few years. And I would say that this event has probably affected more people than the prior ones, but that's also not that surprising considering each cycle it brings in more and more people in crypto.
That's a great point. This cycle is really different from the other ones just because the amount of adoption that has been spread this time around. I mean, gosh, this scandal not only involves like SBF and FTX, it involves like government officials, and now it's, just bleeding all over the place. And, a lot of other things are insolvent now. And, this has taken a turn on like, Solana, FTT has been affected. Well, obviously FTT has been affected. Like, oh my gosh, were you looking at the charts at of FTT during that time? And like, what did you think of that? Like, was there just massive selling, like every like massive red volume candles everywhere?
Yeah, so I remember looking at FTT when it was trading at $22 because Caroline, she tweeted that she would buy the FTT from CZ at $22 so as to mitigate the effects that would have on the market. And I remember posting something in my Telegram channel and saying, look, guys, like it's sitting at $22. And it's like, what happened when the market came for like some of these other tokens in the past, right? It's sitting on the support line. It sits and sits and sits. And then eventually you just get a massive red candle that takes it down. And that's what, I mean, that's the same thing that happens. So honestly, I still wouldn't be surprised to see that same type of thing occur with other, with certain altcoins. I do think some are better than others, but yeah, I mean, like, again, it's one of those things where once the market figures out where the weakness is, it grabs on and it clamps down until that thing dies.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and it did have an effect on other cryptocurrencies as well. Like Solana was one of them because Solana was, I mean, fairly tied to FTX and what they were doing over there. And so yeah, I mean, it's not that surprising. Solana's down 96% from the all-time high, but this is really normal in bear markets. In fact, in 2018, we saw many cryptocurrencies drop 98 to 99%.
It's fast.
Cardano was actually one of them, and I talk about that one on my channel some. And it dropped almost 99%. And it was one of the few that still put in new all-time highs the following cycle. So I would say it's not that uncommon for us to see this type of price action. It's just a fairly standard bear market so far.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people were just straight up shocked. And I think I was like getting into crypto, the social media side, towards the end of the last bear market. And, people were not as, I guess, hurt with the price action that was going on. They were just kind of okay with it. And now I think everyone's just so hurt by it. And then we have the mainstream media that's just really going going ham on us a little bit. You know what I mean? Like they're just fudding us, telling us like crypto sucks, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, we do have big money coming into crypto. I don't know if you heard, but Fidelity opened crypto trading to like retail investors. So big money is still coming into crypto. Do you think that considering like we've hit I don't know, what was the low? 15.4, yes. So 15.4 was the current low. Do you think there's any more people that could continue selling? Or do you think we have enough room for maybe a reversal? We're done with the bear at this point? I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't, I can't picture people selling more. What else is there? Unless there's another dramatic event.
So let me share my screen really quick so I can kind of show you what I'm looking at.
Sure.
Because we talked about this exact question back in the last time we were on before the FTX stuff, and at that time my general expectation was that we would put in a new low, right? Like that we would likely go lower because we normally see that. I mean, a lot of times crypto that we have the bear market, we put in a low sometime in the middle of the year. And a lot of people hope it's the bottom and think it's the bottom, and then it ends up not being the bottom, right? Like this happened in 2018, it happened in 2014. It's no surprise, once again, that it's happened in 2022. But one of the things that I like to look at is sort of like these risk levels. And one of them is the summary risk. And basically what this is it combines a lot of indicators that you've probably heard of for Bitcoin. Things like transaction fees, terminal price, the fear and greed index. A lot of people have heard of that. The MVRV score, the MVRV score, the Pure multiple, which is based on miner profitability, and so on and so forth, right? Logarithmic regression, price metrics. So essentially, I have this indicator that looks at what is the given risk level on the asset class at any given time. And it's interesting. So right now, the risk level is 0.157. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't think long term it's necessarily a bad place to get in, but it also doesn't mean that it can't go down. One of the things I'm looking at though is what is exactly making up, what makes this out, what's making it so high. And what's making it as high as it is not actually the price. It's the social interest in crypto. So there's actually a ton of people that are still interested. And if I show, first of all, let me switch this to a color-coded way. So if you look at it in a color-coded way, you can kind of see sort of the ebb and flow of the bull market and the bear market. But the main thing that's keeping this elevated is not the on-chain risk. It's not the price risk. If I turn off the price risk and the on-chain risk, it's the social risk that still remains relatively high. So what I sort of gather from this is that unfortunately, there still is, I would say there still is a decent chance that Bitcoin could go lower, right? I'm not going to say that it can't. This chart clearly shows that there is room for it to go lower. But I think the more important component as to whether it goes lower or not is also sort of the time-based component as well. Because in bear markets, we see, not only do we see price-based capitulation, but we see time-based capitulation as well, where even after the bear market is over, and the low is in, we then can go sideways, for a year. And you see that in all the prior bear markets, right? You go down, but then you sort of just go sideways for a long time.
It's true.
And that's where you get sort of your time-based capitulation as well. So, the data still would suggest that we could go lower, as much as people might not want to hear it. I do think there's a chance, certainly a strong likelihood that we could eventually go lower, especially since we were dealing with a potential recession in 2023. But the more important thing I think to consider is, whenever the bottom is in, which will probably be, in a few months if it's not already in, we then likely have to go sideways for a while. And then, normally once we get out to the next halving, and once the Fed pivots, and well after the pivot, we would hopefully go back into another bull market.
Sideways is so boring, Ben. Like, let me tell you. And I know that you also look at traditional markets as well. And do you think that Bitcoin is strongly correlated to the traditional stock market? And do you see similarities there? And because, like, to me, Bitcoin is made to not trade that way. And I think eventually, like, it'll stop kind of mirroring the market like it has the past, I think, let's say year or two. But
it's actually a really good question. And my opinion is sort of constantly challenged on that question because, and let me give you an example.
Cool.
So, whenever I was on your channel last, like, I thought we were going to see a new low, but I also thought it was going to correspond to the S&P putting in a new low, right? Like the S&P 500. But what actually happened is the S&P 500 put in a new low, and then Bitcoin did not put in a new low. And Bitcoin did not put in a new low until what happened with FTX, right? Yep. So, it's sort of one of those things where maybe being right, but perhaps for the wrong reason, So, I think you could argue that there's some element of it. It's not as correlated as people might think it is at certain times, So, yeah. For instance, if we get into a recession next year and earnings for a lot of these major companies like Apple and Amazon, et cetera, if they come in really poorly, I think my natural response would be to assume it would negatively affect Bitcoin, and Bitcoin would have to go lower upon that news. But this year's price action shows us that's not necessarily true, right? Like, you could see, in the same way that Bitcoin sort of diverged from the stock market over the past month, not in the way that people were hoping, right? It could theoretically diverge in the future as well, because it's not going to be as dependent on, some of these things that will lead us into a recession, like some of the stocks. But I will say, the S&P 500 still remains in a fairly structural bear market. And I think the main issue with getting too bullish on the stock market right now are the yield curve. So if you look at the yield curve, it's inverting. And if you sort of scroll this back through time, when it inverts, we typically get a recession, right? And you can look at the 01 recession, the 07 recession, right? Like all the way back to the 1990s. When it inverts, we get a recession. And more importantly, when you look at the spread on some of these on the yield curve between some of the more important ones, when it gets inverted like this, we go into a recession, which is the gray shaded region within the next year usually. So wow. I think that's why, every time it inverts, right, it's just a matter of time before the stock market goes into a recession. And it's within the recession, like 9 times out of 10, I think the .com crash was the only one in like the last 100 years that actually bottomed after the recession was over. And I think that was because of what happened in 2001, but 9/11. But if you look, typically speaking, the stock market bottoms during the recession, and there's a lot of evidence in the yield curve that would suggest that we are going to see a recession sometime next year. And so that's why I think it makes sense to be cautious on crypto. And I still am of the opinion that it's not dead or anything. It's just going through a fairly standard bear market. Next year, 2023, is likely going to be somewhat of a boring year. But by the time we get to 2024, 2025, I think it'll probably pick back up again.
And, what do you think of, Bitcoin being compared to tech stocks? Because I know I've heard that, but I don't think it has anything to do with one another. Does it?
So there has been some correlation between them. Like when the NASDAQ has been relatively weak, we've seen Bitcoin be weak as well. But this is one of those things that I was even challenged on recently because, 6 months ago, if you had asked me this, I would have said, if the NASDAQ puts in a new low, so does Bitcoin. The chart, the markets told us that's not necessarily true. So I think it's worthwhile to sort of assume that Bitcoin can bottom before the stock market, because earlier this year it did, right? Like it hit a major bottom in June, and then the stock market continued to fall. So I think there does exist a path where Bitcoin could theoretically bottom a month or two potentially before the stock market bottoms. Bitcoin has a way of kind of getting to where it's going a lot quicker than the stock market. Like when it sells off, it sells off so quickly. So by the time you hear all the bad news, like 3 months later, it's like, well, Bitcoin already dropped 50%, like a lot of people already fled. And it's probably because it's one of the riskier assets, like, because it's just so speculative, unlike some other asset classes.
Didn't that happen in, I want to say, like, it was like 2020 when the pandemic first started and the stock market was crashing, like oil was below $1, but Bitcoin, wasn't it going up at that time? Wasn't it like going the opposite way? 2020? If I'm not mistaken, wasn't it going opposite the stock market?
Well, when we crashed in March, everything went down.
Yeah.
Like oil went negative, and like everything crashed. But then Bitcoin came out of the crash a lot stronger than some other asset classes, right? Like everything ultimately recovered. Well, not everything, but a lot of things recovered, but Bitcoin recovered in a much quicker and swifter way. But again, I mean, I think you could argue that Bitcoin thrives on liquidity. And, when you have the Federal Reserve pumping in trillions and trillions of dollars into the system in a short period of time, that's like perfect conditions for Bitcoin to do well.
Yeah, that was insane. Just the amount of money that was being printed at that time. And I don't know I don't think Jerome Powell like really did anything this month, but if he does raise, interest rates again, what do you think that's going to have? Like, what kind of implication do you think that's going to have on the markets overall? And should it be affecting crypto that much?
Yeah, so I do think they will raise again. I mean, the markets are suggesting it's going to be a 50 basis point rate hike at this point with a small probability of a 75 basis point rate hike. My sort of estimate is that they're going to make it to at least 5% by early 2023. So either in February, which is the next meeting after this one, or the meeting after that, I think they'll hit a Fed funds rate of 5%. And my guess is the terminal rate for at least a while will probably be somewhere between 5 to 5.5%, and they'll see the effects that it has in the market. And they'll see the effects it has on inflation, I should say, and if inflation can actually come back down, because there is at least some evidence to suggest that the Fed funds rate has to go higher than inflation before inflation actually comes back down in a sustained way. Like it's been really sticky this year; it hasn't really come down that much, but the problem with sort of these interest rate hikes, I mean, I think the Federal Reserve is doing the right thing by doing this. I think they did the wrong thing by not raising them sooner, right? Like they should have raised interest rates back in 2021 when the economy was still strong. But if you look at every single time in the past where the Fed pivots and they start cutting rates, that's usually when the stock market capitulates, actually. And it's not. That's why everyone thinks everyone's calling for a Fed pivot. It's like, be careful what you wish for, because a lot of times by the time the Fed pivots, it's because they broke something, right? It's like something in the economy broke. Yeah. And by that point, the market doesn't even care what the Fed's doing because it's already broken. It capitulates, and then the rest of the economy feels it. And so a lot of people think the S&P has to keep going down forever or, for months and months and months, but it doesn't, right? Like it usually bottoms somewhere. I mean, sometimes it doesn't even bottom until they're done cutting rates, but oftentimes it can bottom, maybe like 2/3 of the way through the cutting cycle side of things. So I think these are the reasons why a lot of investors remain cautious, is because it's like we have the inversion of the yield curve, which normally means we're going to get a recession. We also know the S&P doesn't bottom until we're in the recession, and so far I think we're just sort of in one of these like structural bear markets that can last 1 to 2 years. And so far it's already lasted a full year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like a lot of people were posting like, early November, like look at where Bitcoin was a year ago today. Everyone was reminiscing. And, I do think that I feel the market sentiment, we're at a point where we could really just go either way here. And I hope we go up for the better, and we can all just say we have laser eyes and go drive Lambos and yeehaw, you know what I mean? But unfortunately we're, hopefully we hit that bottom. Hopefully it's not too far away. But like you said, there could be sideways trading. Like I remembered like that climb from 7 to 20K when it started to go back up, and it was just so choppy. It was like such a tease. It was like up, then down. It was like a bunch of retracements. And, I don't know, do you picture having those days, like early Bitcoin days, where we'll have like $1,000 candles and things like that?
Well, $1,000 candle today is not actually that hard to do, right? I mean, it was $1,000 candle if Bitcoin's only say $2,000 is a lot harder than if it's $20,000 because it's
True.
just a much smaller percentage of the price. Yeah, I mean, I mean, eventually we'll probably have $10,000 days again, but I mean, you're talking years, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
if we have another, let's say the next bull market starts in 2024 or something, it's possible that we see something like that. I mean, I think we probably saw $10,000 days in this last bull market, but probably when it went down, not when it went up. Like
Yeah.
I think during the summer capitulation, maybe we went down $10,000 in a day or something on some of those wicks. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where the market has to sort of like digest all of the everything that's going on. And one thing that we've sort of lived with for the last 10 years with Bitcoin is like, and this is something that people have said forever, is like, well, it's never experienced a recession. Well, now we're going to experience it.
Yeah.
I mean, more than likely, we're going to experience it. So, my thinking on it is like, Bitcoin has taken a big hit, and it can probably take even a bigger hit too before it's all said and done. But assuming that it survives, which I think it will, I think it'll eventually make the case for Bitcoin stronger, because then, the bears can no longer say, well, it's never survived a recession. Because I mean, again, it was born out of the financial crisis from 2008. And so this is really the first real major hardship from like a, monetary policy point of view that you could say that it's ever actually experienced. So assuming it gets through this, which I think it will in a matter of time, I think it'll make the case for Bitcoin stronger. And then, we'll say, well, yeah, like maybe during a recession, it can go down, but it's proven itself to be resilient even in those times.
Absolutely. Bitcoin is so resilient. And I think, a lot of people are just focused on the price. Meanwhile, we have to focus on the revolution of Bitcoin as well, what it's all about. And how do you think your trading is different in the bear market, this kind of weird time, versus in the bull market? Do you have any different trading strategies that you use, or it's pretty much just always the same?
No, for me, it's completely different in 2022. So like 2022, I'm not much of a trader, honestly. Like I just think, I mean, on my channel for the last year, I basically just say cash is king, as boring as it is. One of the things like that I've sort of recognized, like, the more I'm in the markets, the more I recognize how dumb I am, and how the markets can constantly surprise you. And so like, like trying to trade counter trend rallies or bear market rallies, I know a lot of people do it and they're quite successful, but I'm not one of them. I'm not going to pretend to be one of them. I just, for me personally in 2022, it's just more or less been a time to stack cash and not really buy much of anything. I have bought some Bitcoin this year.
Nice.
But that's about it. I mean, I haven't bought any altcoins in 2022. And the reason is because I've just experienced so many of these bear markets before. I know how badly the altcoin market can get wrecked. Like 2014, 2018, all terrible years for the altcoin market. And a lot of those coins went down 98%. That's why I say don't marry an altcoin, because just because you like it or because you like the fundamentals or because you like the community or whatever it might be, doesn't mean it can't drop 95% in a bear market. And so if you look at history, it shows that the actual accumulation phase for the altcoin market especially is not, I mean, it's not during the bear market, right? It's the year after. It's like, it was not 2014, it was 2015. It was not 2018, it was 2019. And in the same way, I think it's not 2022. Hopefully it'll be 2023 is a much better time to accumulate altcoins. And I think it will be. That doesn't mean they can't go down in 2023, but I think in general, if you had waited until 2023 to even begin accumulating some altcoins, then you probably would be in much better shape. That's not to say that some altcoins have not done well. There have been some that have actually held up pretty well. But there always are. There's always a few altcoins that do much better. And it's really hard picking out which ones those are going to be before the bear market starts. But I sort of take the stance of, once I recognize it's a bear market, it's basically time for me to just offload a majority of my altcoins and refrain from buying them until I think and there's clear evidence that the Bitcoin bear market is over, right? Like I would rather miss the bottom on altcoins than buy every single dip throughout the bear market, right? And hope bottom. I'd rather just say, you know what? I'll let the more speculative people gamble on it, and if they hit the bottom, I'll wish them or I'll say congratulations and whatnot. But for me, I'd rather just let the knives fall. I don't want to catch them. And then once I see more evidence that Bitcoin has bottomed, then I will, then I might try my hand back in the altcoin market, but not until then.
Do you also, speaking of altcoins, do you look at trading pairs at all? Because I know, Litecoin has been doing pretty well, fairly well. And a lot of people look at the BTC LTC chart and are saying like pretty positive things about potential price action there. But I just wanted to ask if you do look at pairs like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually really important. If you look at a lot of alt Bitcoin pairs in 2018, while alts bottomed against the US dollar in late 2018, most of them did not bottom against Bitcoin until mid 2019. So the like ADA Bitcoin, a lot of them. I mean, you could go through a lot of them. A lot of the altcoins that people talk about today didn't exist back then. But a lot of the sort of the older altcoins, they bottomed half a year after Bitcoin bottomed against the US dollar. And as far as Litecoin, so Litecoin is one of these coins that if you look at its Bitcoin pair, it's a macro bleeder. I mean, that's basically what it's done for the last like 7 or 8 years is bleed against Bitcoin. But with that said, there's one time during Bitcoin's sort of cycle that well, maybe more than one time, but I mean, in recent years, there's really one main time that you could point to say Litecoin shows relative strength with respect to the rest of the market. And that is, like the leading up into its next halving. Yeah. And so Litecoin's next halving is in the summer of 2023. So it's this coming summer. So I mean, like if Bitcoin kicks the bucket and drops down to like $12,000 or something, like rest assured, Litecoin's gonna go down with it. But you could still see relative strength on the Litecoin Bitcoin pair, probably up until a month maybe before the halving for Litecoin. And that's what you see if you actually look at the Litecoin USD chart in 2019 and in 2015. What you'll notice is that it rallied up until about like 2 to 4 weeks before the halving, and then it dumped going into the halving, right? So like if you do have a strong position in Litecoin, especially summer 2023, if it's up a lot and we're like 1 month away from the halving, history shows us that it normally sells off into the halving. And that by that point, if the Litecoin Bitcoin valuation is still doing well, not financial advice, right? But history shows that actually converting it to Bitcoin and getting ready for Bitcoin's halving, but at that point would actually make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And do you think that 4-year cycle, because like we were talking about before, like this cycle is not the same as the past ones. Do you think that maybe that 4-year cycle is kind of like out the window at this point? Do you think that's going to change, or we're going to stay relatively close to that?
It's funny because we talk about this every 4 years. I so far I don't think we can definitively say that it's not a thing. Like there's still evidence to suggest it is a thing. From many indicators would point towards April 2021 was the top at 64K. That's what most indicators would say. But the counterpoint is price action is king. And if you take it from that standpoint, then November was the top, right? November 2021 was in fact the top. Yeah. And one thing that's really interesting to look at, and I'm going to share my screen again.
Yes, please.
And it's this, it's comparing the bear markets. So can you see these bear markets for Bitcoin?
Yes, I could.
So we've had 4 of them. The first one was relatively short, and I'm just going to go ahead and hide that one because I just want to focus on the 2 prior ones, the 2014 and 2018 bear market. This bear market is well within the context of those bear markets, right? Like, even though this time might feel different, it actually isn't different so far, right? Like, I mean, this bear market has lasted a little bit longer so far than the one in 2018 did, but it's also still shorter than the one from 2014. So if Bitcoin were to put in some type of major bottom in the next, like, let's say by the first quarter of 2023, let's suppose it puts in a major bottom, between now and the first quarter of 2023, and if that is the bottom, then I still think there's evidence to suggest that we're still pretty much on schedule. If on the other hand, Bitcoin experiences like a lower low, like later on in 2023, then you kind of have to start questioning, like, is it really a thing? I will say that I don't think it'll be this way forever, because there is evidence to suggest that it's actually more a function of like, how cheap is liquidity in the system. And what I think, and there's sort of 2 sides, right? Like, it seems like some people say it's only the halving, and then other people say it's basically access to cheap capital, Yeah. And like liquidity. I think it's a combination of both, honestly, because I think you need cheap liquidity. I mean, you need liquidity, you need access to cheap capital, but I also think that the halving is a great narrative for Bitcoin every 4 years. Like every 4 years, this halving narrative comes up, and I mean, without fail, every single time it has, we've gone into a bull market. And note that the bottom for Bitcoin always came well before the halving.
Yeah,
and the next
sure.
halving, and the next halving is in early 2024. So I'm looking at a bottom for Bitcoin, well before the next halving. And then going up again after the next halving. But I also think it could line up quite nicely with other cyclical things, right? Like the Fed will probably not still be that hawkish in 2024 and 2025. Like they'll probably lay off a little bit and let the economy recover some. So I think you could sort of see things line up, right? Like the Bitcoin halving. By 2024, I would imagine that the stock market will be coming out of its bear market if it hasn't already done so. And so I think you could see a lot of things line up and kind of play out in a very cyclical way.
And how do you think, like, going forward, right? How do you think Bitcoin is going to, what do you think is going to happen essentially with adoption? And how do you think adoption is going to affect price? Because I don't know. I think news kind of does affect price. I don't know if you feel the same way, but there's a lot of bullish news starting to come out, more people adopting Bitcoin and different things developing. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say in the short term, it's more or less like a random walk. Like it kind of just does whatever it wants.
Yeah.
Certainly, when you see big news events, like you will see the price move in some direction based on what that news event was. But I don't think it really affects macro price movement. So like if we're in a bear market and there's positive news, you might see it pop up for a little bit, but then the bear market can continue and bring it back down. And it's sort of like in a bear market, no one really cares about the good news, and in a bull market, no one really cares about the bad news. So all the positive things you see, and you've mentioned some of them in this video, but all these positive things, it's like, well, why is the price of Bitcoin still going down, right? Like, why is it still in a bear market? There's all these positive things. Eventually, we sort of shift back the other way, and all of these new fundamental developments help support a new bull market. And so I would argue that it, like, over the grand scheme of things, like these developments, right, with increased adoption, they will help the price in a positive manner. It can take a long time for that to really have that effect. Because I mean, even if there's a really great news piece tomorrow and it seems like it's the best thing forever for crypto, it's not going to mitigate another major exchange going down, right? Like if another exchange goes down, it doesn't really matter if some new billionaire or whoever it might be is adopting or is now pro crypto, right? Like if people are forced to sell because they think they're no longer going to have access to their crypto anymore, or because they don't trust they don't trust even being able to sell it if they have no access to exchanges they can trust. Some people just are forced sellers, and I'm guessing there were a lot of people that flocked out of FTX and just went back to cash, not because they wanted to, not because they didn't believe in crypto, but because they figured even if Bitcoin goes on another bull run, it doesn't mean anything if they don't actually have access to their Bitcoin anymore. That's the problem, right? And that's what creates these forced sellers. They don't want to be sellers, but they just get so scared by the market. And a lot of times these people that sell, they're probably people that would have said they would have never sold. Like they were not going to be that capitulation candle on the Bitcoin chart. That was not going to be them, but it ends up being them because some of these events happen that they could not possibly imagine at one point, and they become a forced seller. And I mean, this happens every cycle. It also happened in 2018 too. I mean, there was a huge crash at the end of the year. And I mean, a lot of people thought Bitcoin was it. Actually, just today, I went back and was looking at some Reddit threads from 2018 just to sort of gauge the sentiment back then and kind of compare it to where we are today, because it is getting pretty depressing again. In the market, and a lot of people. And one thing I've learned too is that no matter how low we go, right, people always call for it to go lower. And that's that's ultimately a great way to miss out. So that's why I think it's worthwhile to pick up Bitcoin here and there, because you really don't know where the bottom is. But I still think the altcoin market still remains relatively risky, and I think it depends on everyone's own risk tolerance. Again, in 2018, I was a lot more risky. Like I was buying altcoins in Q3 of 2018, thinking they were about to skyrocket, right? And then like a few months later, A few months later, they all dropped another 70 or 80%. And I was like, not again. I'm not going to let this happen to me again. So I'm just more risk averse this time around. And, but I also recognize that it's important for various people to have various strategies. Like people who are younger probably are more risky. People who are like a lot older, they don't want to be risky because they don't have as much time to, to just sit around and wait for it to return to new highs.
Yeah, and also it depends on your flexibility. Like someone my age could be a complete degen because, they could be, but like, someone like you're a parent, you have children, you can't be like gambling all your money away like a degen like you could like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But everyone's different. And that's what's great is that there's always different trading strategies. And like you said, like there's different ways to trade in the bull versus the bear. What I did want to ask you though, because this is something that like was on my mind today. What do you think about the volatility in the stock market? Because I saw a stock that dropped like 90 something percent, right? And it was crazy. But that like, because it was in the stock market, it was okay versus like if that was crypto and something went down 90 something percent or 80+%, people would have flipped out. So do you think that there's a lot of volatility like that in the stock market? And is it a double standard for the crypto market to be maybe just as volatile as some stocks?
Yeah, I mean, and actually in 2019, I remember thinking, and I made videos saying like I thought eventually, crypto volatility would mimic the stock market. So like over time, the volatility of crypto would go down and down and down to sort of be more like the stock market. But actually, after what the Fed did in 2020 and on 2021, it's more like the stock market became more like crypto, right? Where like rather than crypto being like the stock market became more like crypto. And I mean, I think a lot of it is just sort of like an artifact of the Fed, of the Federal Reserve just keeping rates low and people just, people got checks, right? Free checks. I mean, people just throw it into the market. And I mean, look, in the same way that crypto has scams and stuff, right? There's so many like bad projects that pop up in crypto. That stuff happens in the stock market too. There's all sorts of fraud that exists in the stock market. Companies that pretend like they have viable products just so they can sort of chase the bull market. But then after it's all said and done, it's like, well, they don't actually have a viable product like they claim to, and the stock can still go to zero. So look, greed is going to exist anywhere. You don't have to be in crypto to find people who are greedy and who do things they shouldn't do. And I will say this too, the meltdown by FTX and Celsius and Luna and everything else this year, it should not reflect poorly on Bitcoin, because the Bitcoin is not responsible for that, right? It reflects poorly on human greed, right? Like that's what it reflects poorly on.
You're amazing, yeah.
And so that is the thing, and I mean, I hate it because every even in 2018 too, like we saw the same stuff, or the 2017, so many ICOs for ERC20 tokens that were completely worthless. And I mean, every few years, like you just sort of see this come back. So, and that's actually one of the reasons why Bitcoin leads the bull market. Typically, like if you think back to late 2020, it was Bitcoin leading, right? I mean, it was Bitcoin that went up 20x, and then all the altcoins went crazy in 2021, right? But Bitcoin kind of led into that. So one of the reasons is because people get so depressed with the altcoin market and they're so tired of getting rug pulled that a lot of people sort of go back into Bitcoin for sort of the relative safety of it. And then once Bitcoin goes back up, then the altcoin market regains the confidence again to then go back up as well. And that's how you see the oversized gains in the altcoin market. Is not because you bought every bear market rally in the bear market, as you wait and then you buy it when it's sort of just going sideways the year before, hopefully a new bull.
Yeah, wow. That's alpha right there. Thank you for that. And greed is so like it overtakes people. And I think that's like, what happened with a lot of, the stuff that we've seen in this bear market that went down. Like people got comfortable with not having the keys to their crypto. So they gave their keys to things like Celsius and all these other things like FTX. And then we ultimately paid the price for that. So I think, we have to be able to control our emotion, control our greed, take our coins off of the exchanges, put it in our wallet. And how do you, as a trader, in the past and maybe in the future, how do you control your like ego? How do you control your greed when it comes to trading and not really attach your emotions to that? Because I think a lot of people are really attached to their bags.
Yeah, I mean, I think an important thing is just being able to admit that you're wrong about something. And I think a lot of people have a hard time doing that. And as I've gone on in my investing career, it's gotten easier to just sort of like have a thesis on something. And like, so like, for instance, one thing that I thought was going to happen was I thought that, the dominance of Bitcoin by this point would be higher than it is right now. And it's not because I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I put on a maxi hat during a bear market because I just know how badly the altcoin market can get wrecked. But I think like, when you kind of look back, and it can be easy to really try to figure out how you're right about every little thing. But the truth is even the best traders in the world are not going to be right 100% of the time. They're probably not even going to be right 60% of the time. If they're right 55% of the time and they just minimize their losses on the bad trades and maximize it when it goes their way, they can still make a ton of money. So I think one thing to do with sort of egos is to recognize that the market will humble you. And one of the things that I remember thinking back in 2019 was, and I even said this, right? I was like, look, guys, I think we're going to have another bull market, coming up in the next year or two. Like, I think we're going to have another bull market. But obviously there's no such thing as a sure thing, right? There's no certainty in this, right? Like, it might not happen. But my thought was, if it does happen, I'm going to be along for the ride, right? Like, if it does happen, I sure as hell am going to be riding that bull market, and I'm not going to be sitting on the sidelines. So it was sort of just recognizing that. And the reason I say that is because we're coming up to a similar phase, right? Like, It was, 2015, 2019, 2023, right? Like, it's going to be one of those things where I'm probably just going to say, look, guys, like we've entered into the year after the bear market. Normally this is a sideways year. Normally it's an accumulation year. Normally we look forward to the next Bitcoin halving, and I'll be honest about it and I'd say, like, I think it's going to go. I think we'll have another bull market, but we have to put our egos aside. And if it goes down again, it just is what it is, right? We're not going to get everything right. Hopefully we're not going to get everything wrong either, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly something that you kind of have to learn to admit when you're wrong and set it aside, and kind of adapt to what the market is potentially telling you, I guess.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think we needed that. We need a little bit of Ben Cowen sense. And if you guys are out there and if you're enjoying the show, you like the vibe that's happening, please smash those likes. I see so many of you are watching right now. I see you out there. I see you watching. I know you're listening. Smash those likes if you can. Show some love. Say hi in the chat. I know Ben is a busy guy. He has to make his way out in the world and analyze those charts, drop alpha with other people. So Ben, can you actually tell me about your newsletter? Because I know this is like a big thing into the cryptoverse world. Do you mind talking about what is in your newsletter, how often it comes out, and where everyone can find you?
Sure. I mean, so we do a free newsletter. You can find it just by going to like newsletter.intothecryptoverse.com. But yeah, we put out a weekly newsletter. It's completely free, and it's sort of just kind of talking about the market, right? And we might pick out a couple charts during that week to talk about. To give you an example of like a chart that we talked about somewhat recently. Let me just share my screen and just kind of provide an idea.
Sure.
These are we sort of just look at these like cyclical indicators that are also very aesthetically pleasing, that really show the cyclical nature of Bitcoin and how this is the Bitcoin percentage of supply and profit and loss, and kind of just shows that there's like an ebb and flow to sort of the bull market and the bear market. And you can smooth it out by taking a moving average and kind of see that once they cross, we get into the accumulation phase, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So it happens. I mean, it happens every so, and if you look at each one, and this is because earlier you asked me, is the bottom, you think the bottom's in or whatever. If you look at this chart on the 30-day SMA, normally the bottom occurs after they cross, right? So it's just after they cross that the bottom typically occurs. And they're like, look, I mean, they're about to cross, like within the next day or two, they're going to cross. So these are the reasons that we put out these newsletters, just to provide people with some sort of like update on, what are some of these like cyclical indicators suggesting. And there's a lot of them. I mean, there's so many indicators that you can look at, but it's just to give you an idea of where we are, so that people can so that people can like better manage their risk in these markets. So yeah, it's completely free to sign up. And And yeah, hopefully people find value in it.
That's awesome. Guys, in the live chat and in the description of the video, I just put the link to the newsletter, the Into the Cryptoverse website, Ben Cowen's Twitter, and also his YouTube channel, which is full of constant alpha. So please watch out for that. Please subscribe to his channel and just like pay attention to what Ben Cowen's doing, because he's such a smart guy. And thank you, Ben, for coming on the show. And thank you everyone in the audience for coming today. If you enjoyed the stream, smash the likes, subscribe, share the stream out with friends. Tomorrow I will be back at 12 p.m. Eastern live here for the Daily Zest, dropping the daily news on you guys. And also at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, I will have Charlie Lee, the creator of Litecoin, joining me on the stream. So tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern, don't miss out. Click that link right there. Hit the bell, get notified, and hit the like on there if you can. And comment after the show if you enjoyed it, where you think we're at in the markets. Do you think we're ready to moon? Do you think we're ready to go down a little bit more? Let me know. Thank you again for coming. Thank you again, Ben. You're amazing. Have a great day, everyone. And as always, stay zesty. Peace.